Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sit and See. I'm Dr. Jared Jones. My research specialties are ancient systems of meditation, Buddhist philosophy, the cognitive science of meditation, and the philosophy of science. I've been a Buddhist for about 20 years and also trained in Taoism for about the last 5 years, and have done the pretty traditional Buddhist training route in the Gelug tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, as well as training in a number of other things on and off here and there. My sort of mission with Sit and See, as well as with Sit and See at least, is to train people who live in the real world as modern people with lives and families and kids and hobbies and responsibilities, how to train in meditation in the midst of real everyday activity. So that's why we're here. The general flavor of these classes is to ask questions about your actual practice of meditation. I'm happy to take questions about types of meditation I don't teach, as long as it's practices you yourself are actually doing right now and not sort of general theoretical questions or comparative questions. I do open Q&As for that. This is really aimed at what's happening in your actual practice from day to day. So in terms of the techniques that I teach, the techniques that I generally teach are really geared towards sort of a narrow bandwidth of training circumstances. If you went into retreat, there's all sorts of stuff you could do, and there's all sorts of techniques you could use. But when you're trying to train in real life, I think the number of techniques that will be really, really effective becomes smaller, because the types of techniques you need, for example, to generate the initial stages of concentration are different than what you would need if you were in retreat. Are there exceptions to that? Probably. But I think for most people, it works in the way that I've laid out. So for example, the type of breath meditation that I teach is extremely high intensity because your distractions are extremely high intensity when you're living in the real world. So you need something with equal force to meet your distractions head on, and just being nice to yourself and being kind and letting the mind settle on its own and all of this sort of thing, if you don't have 8 hours a day to do that, won't be very effective. And to be frank, I have difficulty understanding how it would be effective at all. Because your distractions, according to the canon, are like a drunken wild bull elephant barreling through the forest. And simply being nice to it is not going to stop it from barreling out of control drunkenly through the world, right? You have to have something that meets it head on and stops its activities. So that's just one example. And then once you've actually been successful in getting the mind to stay somewhere you put it for a short period, then you need a technique to make the mind very, very calm, very, very fast. And the best technique I've found for this that works in a short period instead of, over the course of 3 or 4 days in retreat is body scanning meditation. Part of what made that decision was my own personal practices in a couple of different traditions that use body scanning, including Thai forest and some other things. But part of that decision was also based on the literature. There's just a huge amount of cognitive scientific literature on things like the body scanning and the benefits that it has. The analogy I often use is when you when they train soldiers in the United States how to fall asleep behind enemy lines, they teach them a really basic form of body scanning meditation because it makes your mind so calm that you can fall asleep even when your life is at risk. you know, so for us, just trying to get our mind to be calm so we can point it at some activity without it running away, this is a very, very helpful technique. Within a 10-minute, 15-minute period, you can increase the quality of your concentration quite a bit. And then you're going to have a new problem, which is, just as I described there, if the mind gets very calm and it's not very lucid, it's not very bright, then it tends to fall asleep. And so the great texts, they talk about needing to have some type of internal approach that allows you to overcome this problem as well, which is in part why I train people to do it standing, train people to do it walking, because it's harder to fall asleep if you're standing up. And furthermore, I then transition people over to things like resting on the nature of your conventional consciousnesses, like the entirety of body consciousness or the entirety of visual consciousness, etc., which comes from the Indian Mahasiddha tradition and the Tibetan tradition of my school, the Geluk school. And this keeps the mind very fresh. And you can also take it off the cushion and into other kinds of activities. Um, yeah, so in so many words, I'm just sort of rambling on because no questions have come in. But normally, what we do, hey Barack, welcome. Good to see you again. Normally, what we do and how I do it is I encourage people during the first 20 minutes of class or so to just ask whatever questions you have about your practice. I'll do my best to answer them and to offer my advice on, if they're my techniques, obviously I'll be much better at answering them than if they're not, but I have opinions on other things as well. So if I can take your questions and help you with your practice, that's what the first 20 minutes or so is for. And then we usually do somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes of actual practice afterwards. And those of you who can see the aspect of the room already know what's coming for today. Well, if there aren't any questions coming in, and I think I have a bit of a delay where it takes a while for me to actually arrive at your destination. Barack, what's interesting, there's a couple things that are interesting about this mug. One is that it has a skull on it, which is good for certain things I'm not going to discuss. And the other is that there's this really silly thing on the internet, and there's this really silly thing about human psychology that for no good reason, when you see a person holding a mug, they're more relatable and you're more likely to take a little bit of time to listen to what they have to say. So being aware that that's true and wanting to help other people, it's pretty easy to just have a mug. And then all of a sudden, I'm easier to relate to, and more people will want to listen to what I have to say, even though nothing about me has changed, according to modern psychology. you know, it's so super silly. Another thing is, watch, if I'm talking to you like this and we're just having a conversation, all of a sudden, if I go like this and I'm talking and we're having a conversation, I get a little bit more of your attention just because there's something in my hand, which again, no real reason for this that makes sense in any sort of logical way. But there's just silly things about our psychology that if someone's holding an object of some kind, for some reason you want to listen to them a little more than if they're not holding an object. You know, just silly. That's silly, sort of illogical, illogical things. Uh, Anyways, I was joking with my wife because if you want to do philosophy on the internet, you also have to have glasses. And actually, I was doing so much work on all of this for you guys. I was spending so much time staring at screens and all this that I started to go blind. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't read anything. So I had to go get glasses because I legitimately couldn't continue the work if I mean I literally couldn't see to type things. It was bad. In the last 30 days, just my eyes went totally crazy. Okay, Orc Knuckles. That is a hell of a name. I have been watching videos for a bit, but other than your 5 foundations courses, is there a starting point you suggest besides jumping into the sit and see? No, I would say regardless of your background, regardless of your tradition, regardless of your training sort of understanding more generally, I would recommend jump into the 5 foundations, spend at least a month, maybe two, if you're new, working on foundation one. And you only have to do 5 minutes a day. Um, to give an example that proves the case, one of my students, who, by the way, isn't even Buddhist, she's Jewish, she spent the first 2 years just trying as best she could to consistently get 5 minutes of practice in a day because she has health problems and other things going on and whatever. And it wasn't until she hit like year three and did a short retreat, she couldn't even do the whole retreat. She did 4 days of the 5 days of retreat, that all of a sudden, bang, she gained the ability to do way more practice and was able to sit longer, is now able to do two 20 to 40-minute sessions a day. And it just sort of, the light switched on. And long before that, she told me that, she had been training in other types of meditation for 30 years before I met her. And I say this sometimes, I hope it doesn't make me sound arrogant or something, but I say it because it's important and because I don't want this to happen to other people. She said that training basically just in intensive breath meditation, a few minutes a day, provided her with more benefit than her previous 30 years of training in mindfulness and vipassana. Now, of course, that could be a bit, you know, that could be a bit of sort of, how to say, these are the words that she used. And I think the key point is that even just being able to bring your mind to one activity for the first time, maybe you already think you can do that. And when you realize that you've never done that in your life, it's like a earth-shattering experience to be able to place your mind somewhere and actually legitimately keep it there for a while. It changes the quality of everything else you do if you work that muscle out and you make your ability to just grab your mind and place it where you want. If you work that muscle out even for a little bit every day, it makes a huge difference to a lot of things, not just, being on the cushion. Anyway, so I would suggest spend a month or two if you're new on Foundation One, and I'm happy to hop on the phone with you or do a video call. No, she's married with 2 kids and lives in the United States, and I live in Scotland. So, um, what was I saying? So if you want to chat on the phone about what your, how to say, how to make your way through the course materials, how to make your way through the different techniques based upon what your background is and your interests are and so forth, I'm happy to get on the phone with you. And as I've mentioned on some of the other streams, all of the information that I have to teach is already available for free besides my book. And I'm trying to decide exactly what I want to do with the book, because basically, if you put something on the internet, somebody else will take it and turn it into something without your permission and sell it to people. And I'm not sure that I want that to happen with my book. So I may end up putting that in with my course materials and not having the entire thing available otherwise. But the thing is, if you were to read that book by itself, I don't know how much you would get out of it anyway. Like, you need to read it with commentary. Uh, So let me see. I imagine 10-minute sessions, Sam Harris waking up saying, I remember the period of major emotional turmoil, but then after a few sessions, felt like my mind was so refreshing and clear. Yeah, yeah, it doesn't take that much practice in the beginning to change the quality of your mind a lot. In terms of how much to do every day, one of my teachers basically recommends, like, just get the habit started so that whatever amount you're doing is consistent, so that you can do, let's say, at least 5 minutes, and you commit every day, no matter what happens, you're doing that 5 minutes. So once you have that 5 minutes established, and then you start adding on other techniques, naturally you'll end up doing more. Um, like Cleric, for example. Cleric, for example, he was when he started coming to class, he had been doing, I think, 2 months of of his own thing prior to meeting, and then I think it was like day 4 or 5, we were doing a session in class, and he went from being able to do like 10 minutes or 20 minutes of meditation up to an hour during the class. He just did an hour and didn't even think about it. So the amount of time that you do will increase as your concentration increases, and you will naturally want to spend more time on the cushion. So you don't actually have to push it in that way. And then occasionally, if you do retreat, when you come out of retreat, very often, at least for a period of time, you'll have a much greater inclination and ability to do a lot more practice. So, you kind of negotiate with yourself in the beginning a bit, and then it just becomes how you do things. Okay. Would you agree with the sentiment that awakening is always accident, yet consistent and correct practice develops makes us more experience that accident? Um, so, from the point of view of Buddhism, realization is the end result of a causal process. So, if you put all the causes in place and remove all of the things that obstruct that cause from occurring, then the result will occur when it can. So think about this a bit like planting a garden from seed. So if you make sure that not crows won't come along and eat all the seeds you planted, and if you make sure that the water is there and that there's enough nutrients in the soil and that the sunlight amount is appropriate, and if you make sure that when weeds pop up, you pull them out so that they're not taking the sunlight and nutrients and water from the things that you planted there, then not, notwithstanding, plant diseases and so forth, if you make sure that those don't arise in the plant, you will have tomatoes at some point in your garden if you planted tomatoes, right? It's not actually a question, it's a matter of causality. Did you put all of the causes and conditions in place? And did you remove all of the things that could obstruct the result from occurring? If you did that, then the result will occur. Now, in terms of accident, maybe you don't know exactly when the result is going to occur, but if you have all the causes and conditions, it is inevitable, if there's no obstructing factors, that the result will happen. Matter of fact, one of my teachers is quite fond of saying meditation is a result. You can't make it happen. You have to put all the causes in place and then it occurs. I don't know if that helps actually. Anyways, I mean, that makes it sound a bit more grim than it is, I think. Like basically, if you don't have the cognitive skills that you need to train in meditation, that if you don't build up the cognitive skills you need for meditation, then meditation doesn't occur. No matter how much determination you have in sitting down to do it, if you're not using the techniques that build up the cognitive skills that lead to meditation, then you will never meditate. Okay. I've heard in passing citations of studies of meditation that can be bad for certain kinds of people. Is that due to the divorce of the practice from the tradition? I mean, yeah. I mean, there was a big study, I think, at some point where they were looking at certain groups of mindfulness practitioners in California, if I'm not mistaken, and they found that it actually made them more arrogant, and that was a big surprise. I think it also made them less empathetic, if I'm not mistaken, and they were very surprised by this result. And basically, the argument was then made that the just training and concentration or moment by moment awareness by itself doesn't lead to these other kinds of good qualities. It's not necessarily linked to a reduced ego or to increased empathy. You have to cultivate other stuff that leads to those results. And I would tend to agree with that. As a matter of fact, it's entirely possible that you would train a bit in concentration, and then you would think, oh, look how special I am now. I can concentrate and I can make my mind do all this stuff, and other people can't do that. God, I'm so superior. I'm so much better than these people around me. I was actually talking to somebody who was having that experience where they were going, God, everyone else is just wasting their time. And God, we're us practitioners, we're sort of so much better. And I'm going, you're missing the bus. The bus to realization is leaving and you're missing it. Yeah, you need to combine all of the other factors of the path so that this doesn't just turn into more arrogance. Okay. Uh, so from a Buddhist perspective, Swifter, Jesus, or not Jesus, sorry, uh, Buddha is a being that can't die. So that's not a big problem for us, my friend. A Buddha is a being that has overcome the ordinary process of death. And Buddha is fully available to you right now. There are countless Buddhas sitting in the room with us, according to Buddhism, and countless bodhisattvas. And if you had the right conditions in place, they would be completely available to you to help you with whatever you needed in terms of training or what have you. So Shakyamuni Buddha is alive, very much so. The promise of Buddhism is to overcome old age, sickness, and death, not to like be a slightly nicer person. Okay. Let's see. Can you explain meditation samadhi? There are levels. Yeah. So GJ, there are levels. I don't want to go into too much detail. I have done this in previous streams, but in brief, there are 9 stages, according to Kamalashila's model from the 8th century for training and concentration. And at each stage, you're either developing a new skill or the type of effort you're applying changes, or you're overcoming a new problem. So just as, to try to do it in like 60 seconds or less, because we're getting to the time where we should do some practice instead of me going. uh, the first 4 stages, the problem that you have is that your mind is distracted. It's roughly speaking, it runs around between your senses and it runs around between ideas that it finds much more interesting than the object of meditation, right? So when you pull the mind inward on the breath, for example, using what I call Foundation 1, intensive breath meditation, you're overcoming the problems of the first 2 stages of meditation. The first problem is you can't actually get your mind to the object. You think you brought it to the object, but actually, like 98% of your mind is still running around doing stuff, and you haven't pulled very much of your awareness to the object. And so you haven't made contact with the object yet. The sign you've made contact with the object is it seems like your mind has gotten worse than it's ever been in your life, that your meditation is now worse than it's ever been. Why? Because you've finally noticed your mind runs all over the place and you can't make it do what you wanted it to do. So the first sign is you notice that your mind is a terrible mess. And this is where a lot of people quit. They go, I tried meditation, all of a sudden my mind was terrible, and I realized I can't do meditation, I suck at this. That's actually the sign that you were starting to make progress for the first time. So you place the mind on the object, then the next problem you have is you can't keep it there, right? You can make contact, but you can't keep it there, it runs away. And when it runs away, you don't notice that it ran away, and you spend a lot of time doing other stuff with the mind, and then you notice, oh, I'm not on the breath. And then you have to pull it back. And it's hard to pull it back. It requires great energy, great force to pull it back away from the distractions. And then it only stays for a few seconds and it runs right back away again. It can be very frustrating. So that's the second stage, where you can bring it back and it'll stay for a few seconds, but it's mostly still running around out of control. Third stage, it now, because you've exerted great force on your attention for quite a while, maybe a couple of months at least, now the mind will stay mostly where you put it for the first time, but it runs away. When it runs away, you notice almost immediately it ran away, and it's really easy to bring it back. You just, almost without thinking, you bring it right back. You do think a bit. You have to sort of, there's a bit of conceptual thought in there, but it comes back very easily. Fourth stage is now the mind never leaves the object. And then you have a new problem, which is that the mind starts to go like this. And it gets less lucid. It becomes dull. So when the mind is able to stay, then the attention starts to be divided between the nice feeling of the mind being calm and the object of meditation. And so if you think about your mind only having a certain amount of bandwidth to do stuff, since it only has a certain amount of bandwidth to do stuff, because part of your attention is over here observing this nice sort of calm sensation, for lack of a better term, and part of your attention is on the object, this goes from being like 8K Ultra HD high definition awareness of the object to being sort of dull and fuzzy and kind of grainy, like a movie from the 1980s, right? Pixelated. And as your mind continues to pull inwards towards the mind being calm, they say it sort of sinks. It sort of, and this is why you find that you're, after a while, you've been sitting there, you go like this, right? Because your mind is sinking, it's becoming less lucid. And so then you have to apply either a new technique or some other antidote internally so that the mind stays lucid and fresh. And then having done that, there's another problem which we don't need to discuss. And then after this, there are two problems that are basically subtler versions of what you dealt with before. So I think on the sixth stage, if I'm not mistaken, sixth or seventh stage, I'm pretty sure it's the sixth. The problem you're mainly dealing with is that the mind doesn't leave the object, but for the first time you can see that the mind is moving like this. It's just moving like this. It never leaves the object, but if you were to stop your focus on the object, this would erupt or arise into a thought that would pull you off. So there's this process of ideation that's going on, sort of fully prepared to move off the object if your effort of holding the mind on the object stopped. Then this will sort of erupt and arise into a thought that drags you off into some new direction. So once you overcome this, or depends on which model you look at, maybe you do these a bit at the same time, but roughly speaking, once you overcome that, you have a new problem, which is that your mind is not absolutely, vibrantly, stunningly aware of the meditation object. So you're seeing the meditation object in 1080p instead of seeing it in 8K, right? The mind that's observing the object, instead of having it be like absolutely stunningly, vibrantly, lucidly, cognitively engaged with the object, it's just holding it with a normal amount of lucidity, a normal amount of cognitive freshness. And since it doesn't have this extremely bright, stunningly bright type of cognitive freshness, they call that subtle mental dullness. When you overcome that, then the mind is both, for the first time ever, the mind is both stable and it's lucid. Prior to this, you've never had that experience, or maybe only in the rarest moments of your life doing certain things have you had that experience, but for most of us, probably never had that experience of a mind like that. And then it takes a little bit of effort to hold the mind in that condition. And the problem you have at this stage is that you've gotten so good at applying antidotes to the problems that come up in meditation that you apply antidotes when there's no problem. It's sort of like when you watch a boxer and the other guy is, he's bobbing and weaving, and one boxer thinks he's about to throw a punch, so he goes like this, right? He's gotten so good at responding to what he thinks is a problem coming that he responds when there's no problem coming. And so this is called over-application, which is a problem for advanced meditators. And so you have to then let go of the antidotes that you've cultivated for, probably years up to that point, which again is not easy, and let the mind rest in the state that you've produced. And then finally, you're in a state of concentration where you're not even doing that. And this is finally what's called samadhi. You've finally accomplished actual single-pointed concentration in an effortless, with effort. And then one more step. You have to spend so much time in that state that you achieve the ability basically to remain in that state as long as you want. So in the beginning, it takes a little bit of effort to hold the mind in that state. So after 8 hours or something, you'll get a little tired and fall out of that state, or you won't be able to maintain it. But if you train, for, I don't know what they say, it's like 2 months or 3 months at that level, where you already have the ability to generate that kind of mind, then you make it effortless because you become so familiar with it. And when it becomes effortless, there's a new quality eventually after effortless concentration that comes up, where it allows you to sit for as long as you want. You could sit for 2 months if you want to without eating, sleeping, drinking, or losing your attention on the object, because the meditation sort of feeds your system, you could say. And so then finally, you've achieved actual calm abiding, actual sort of full-on concentration for the first time when that occurs. So the bar is actually pretty high. Everything we're doing up to that point, up to that level, is training us or preparing us to be able to do that. But as you can see, every step and stage, there's a new problem that's occurring, and there's a new antidote we're applying, or there's a new kind of effort we're applying, or something like this. So this is roughly, to try to do it in 5 minutes or less is the process described by Kamalashila. And I think it's a very straightforward description. It's much easier to understand, I think, than, for example, the jhana model is a bit more difficult to understand in terms of training, from a training standpoint. But that may just be my own bias talking. I don't know. Okay. Let's see. So when you have a looping negative thoughts, Barak, that's what's called inappropriate attention in Buddhist psychology, where your mind is out of control, paying attention to and feeding more thoughts into, for example, something that makes you really angry. That's called inappropriate attention. And actually, what I call rumination meditation, Foundation 5, is the opposite of that. So you use the exact same process of appropriate attention, attending to reasons, observations, logical analyses, to generate internal states you actually want and that benefit you, rather than things that are harming you and harming other people. Which again is quite helpful for a person living in the real world. Most of your life will be lived probably not in a meditative condition. It'll be lived with whatever happens to be occurring on the surface of your mind. So if you could reshape your attitudes, your motivations, your worldview, et cetera, that is mostly what you're going to be living through, and therefore more benefit will come from having the quality of the surface of the mind be better. And you achieve that through appropriate attention, or ruminating on reasons, observations, etc., that lead to things like humility instead of arrogance, loving kindness instead of hatred, patience instead of anger, or compassion instead of anger, willpower and determination instead of being a doormat, or what's the other one? Or laziness, So you cultivate good qualities on purpose, because you'll be much more functional and beneficial to yourself and other beings if you cultivate those qualities. Why are so many people scammers and so forth? I want to try to keep it, if I can, to practice, your direct practice related questions, Dylan, if we can. I don't know, honestly. Um, I think part of the reason there's so much weird stuff in this sphere of the world is because nobody can look at your mind and know what's actually happening in there. And so it's possible for a person to just say that they've accomplished things, or to say they know things, and say they can do things that they can't do. And as long as externally they mostly, not even entirely, but like just mostly present that kind of personality, then other people will think they've actually done it. So it's unfortunately a relatively easy area to fake capability. And here's the other thing. I've spoken with one of my teachers a lot, and we've come to this sort of conclusion. We call it the 1% rule. It's the 1% rule. If you have enough knowledge and capability to move someone from their ordinary condition, which from a Buddhist point of view and Taoist point of view, etc., is not very nice, to being 1% better than it was, that change is so dramatic for most people that they could be hooked in with you for years, because you've shown them that things can be better than you thought. And just that small change makes them think, well, maybe all of the rest of this also, what they're saying is true. And then maybe they get 2% better than it was, but it doesn't actually require that much knowledge or skill to take someone 1 or 2% further down the road from where they were in the beginning. But again, for most people, that's such a dramatic change that you can hook people in, and you've got them on the hook now. And I think this is how a lot of charlatans work and a lot of cults work and things, where you feel a little bit better because you're there, or you feel a little bit better because of the practices or the lifestyle or whatever, and people get hooked in. Okay. Like I said, though, let's try to keep it about your personal practices if we can. Uh, yeah, I'm not sure about The Mind Illuminated. I don't think I've read that book. It's also important to know as a general rule that unless you've attained arhatship from a Buddhist standpoint, unless you've actually achieved nirvana, you still have all of the negative emotions, all of the negative drives that would lead you into negative behaviors. So you could actually be a pretty accomplished meditator in terms of concentration and still have all of the negative motivations and things that would lead you to do really unethical stuff. So these two things actually can live together and be true at the same time. So accomplished meditators aren't necessarily people who are going to be ethical. And that's hard for people to digest, but it's entirely consistent with Buddhist psychology. So you need to sort of, how to say, in a sense, you have to look at someone's ethics independent of whether or not they can do extraordinary things on the cushion. And on the other hand, in some cases, somebody actually is a really accomplished practitioner in terms of concentration or what have you, and you could learn a lot from them in that area, but you wouldn't want to listen to them in terms of their training in ethics, which some Buddhists are not going to like because they think that the ethics has to come along with the concentration in a certain way. And I think there's important truths to that, but there are some exceptions to it in terms of, like, if you actually look at capable practitioners, there are a few that seem to have bad ethics and nonetheless can sit down and do 12 hours of meditation because it's Tuesday. So, okay, let's do some practice. All right, for those of you who know, you already know what's coming because I'm seated in this direction in the room. For those of you who haven't trained with me before in these techniques, you can stay seated, it's no problem. So we're going to be doing body scanning into full body awareness meditation in a standing position today. If you can't do it standing or don't want to, just it's okay, Dylan. It's okay. Then just do the body scanning and the full body awareness and so forth, 5 points, 6 directions and so forth. Just do it in a seated position, that's fine. I'm going to do it standing, and I'll give very brief instructions on the standing portion. If you'd like more elaborate instructions, it's in one of the previous Sit and See episodes where we're doing standing practice. Okay. So, in brief, you put your feet like you're standing on railroad tracks. You want to have your feet facing forward as if you, and you're going to line up the insoles of your feet and make two straight parallel lines. If you're thinking about it from the outside of your feet, don't line it up based upon your pinkies because your pinkies flare out a bit. So line it up as if you don't have pinky toes on your feet. So if you're thinking about it from the outside of your feet being lined up, imagine basically make your feet just slightly pigeon-toed. Your feet will be hip distance or shoulder distance, but no wider than shoulder distance. This is not good. Should be here or here. Okay? So once you have that done, you bend the knees enough so that your weight, if you watch my center of gravity, see how my whole body ends up shifting forward? Look behind me and you'll see what I mean. When I bend my knees, your body weight actually, your whole body comes forward. You see it? So then your body weight ends up resting here, more or less, on the foot, just between and behind the big toes. So The reason that this is important is from that position, you're balancing on a combination of the bones and the stretchy bits of the tendons instead of just relying on the muscles to hold you up or just relying on the bones to hold you up, which is what would happen if you locked everything out. So there are reasons to do it this way. I'm not going to get into it, but it's important to do it this way for numerous reasons. In terms of your head, drop the chin slightly and just sort of almost like you have a balloon attached to the top of the sort of back third of the skull. Let everything else fall away from that point while keeping the skull where it is and bending the knees. And then just try to relax any extra tension you have in the neck, in the back, etc., and just let the posture be as natural as you can. For the arms, instead of letting these be like limp noodles, you keep just a little bit of life in the hands, just enough to keep them open, and then you place them not to your side like a military person, but at a 45 degree, not in front, not at the side, about 45 degrees, and put the middle finger on the thigh. And this will give you more feedback on whether or not your posture is going like this or what have you. Just having that point of contact keeps the whole posture a little bit more stable and also stretches the fascia in the upper body and connects it to the lower body, which will make standing for a longer period of time more easy. Okay, having said all of that, let's begin the scan. It is normal for your feet to feel like they have caught on fire, and that feeling will go away after you start walking or moving again. So just, in so many words, just hang in there. Don't shake it out, don't wiggle around, stand still. Okay, so starting with the feet, place your mind in both feet. Ankles, lower half of your calf, upper half, knees, lower half of the thigh, upper half of the thigh, front of the hips, back of the hips. Find the sacrum, follow it down to your tailbone. From the tailbone, move forward to the anus, perineum, and scan your sexual organ. When you finish scanning the organ, come to the most sensitive point or to the tip. Now slide your awareness backwards, back to the tailbone, back up the sacrum to the lower part of the waist in the back. And then to the waist in the front. And to the diaphragm belt in the back, which is just the middle third of your torso, and the diaphragm belt in the front. And the back of the chest. And the front of the chest. Top of your left shoulder. Front. Outside. And the back, including the scapula or shoulder blade, whichever term you prefer. Down to the left bicep. elbow, forearm, wrist, palm and the back of your hand, and your fingers. Now bring the awareness to the top of the right shoulder, front, side, back, bicep, elbow, forearm, wrist, palm and back of hand, and the fingers. Bring your awareness up to the lower third of your neck. Spend a little bit of extra time on the back lower third of your neck, which is where us moderns tend to store quite a bit of our anxiety and have a lot of tension. So just place the mind there calmly. Don't adjust anything, but just let your mind really soak into that back third, that back lower third of your neck. Middle third of your neck, the upper third of your neck, the joint between the neck and the skull, the back of the scalp, left side, right side, left ear, right ear, and the forehead. Left eyebrow, left eye, right eyebrow, right eye, left cheek, right cheek, nose, your upper lip, your lower lip and chin, your top lip, bottom lip, and the skin inside your mouth, teeth, roof of the mouth, below the tongue, tongue. On the tip of the tongue, take your awareness backwards along the tongue to the throat and be aware of the throat. From the throat, slide your awareness up to the top of the head. And become aware of the top of the scalp. Now from the top of the scalp, find the most sensitive point. And if there's no point that has more sensations or more sensitivity, then just put your mind on the back third of your skull in the middle of the back third. And then stretch your awareness down from there to your left hand. And be aware of the left hand and the top of the head. Stretch your awareness down from the top of the head to the right hand. And hold those 3 points. Stretch the awareness down to the left foot. Hold 4 points. Stretch the awareness down to the right foot. Hold 5 points. Top of the head, both hands, both feet. Brush the awareness, top of the head, both hands, both feet. Hold 5 points. Okay. Take a short break. Don't shake your legs out, but if you need to walk a bit, just walk a bit, because there's probably either pins and needles or feelings of heat or things in the feet. Maybe the lower legs, that's normal. And while you walk a bit, you can do the next foundation, foundation 3, which is maintaining 5 points while walking. So just keep part of your awareness on the 5 points as you walk. Good. If you were standing, you can come back to a seated position. So, Drogen, if you'd like a really detailed description, there's a wonderful book that's pretty inexpensive, and then it's a short book called Calming the Mind by Jen Lamrimpa. It's a good book. It'll give you sort of an overview of the things I discussed today in terms of training and concentration, but roughly speaking, the stages you go through are overcoming distraction, overcoming the mind getting dull, overcoming subtle distraction, and overcoming the mind having subtle dullness. And there's a couple other little bits in there, but that's not so important for today's purposes. And then once you can generate a state of mind that doesn't have evident distraction, evident dullness, subtle distraction, or subtle dullness, then you have to relax your awareness and apply no antidotes because there's no problems occurring, and you've built up this really strong habit of applying antidotes, and that becomes a problem. So you have to stop doing that. And that's called equanimity. And then you have to spend enough time in a perfectly concentrated equanimitous state of concentration that it becomes effortless. And then you have to spend enough time in an effortless state of concentration that you become so familiar with it that it fundamentally changes how your body and your mind work. And there's a transformation that occurs that's called pliancy. And you get little tastes of pliancy as you build up concentration, actually. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens bit by bit. So full pliancy, full ability to sort of sit and train your mind in concentration means that you can literally sit for 2 months just because you decided to sit for 2 months. Bang. Your mind enters concentration and it won't come out for 2 months. No sleeping, no eating, no drinking. You just sit. And the body doesn't get tired, the mind doesn't get tired. So that special capability is called mental and physical pliancy, or agility, or suppleness, they sometimes say, where the body and mind become completely usable, completely amenable to whatever type of training you want to do, because now the concentration is so good, it's in a sense, you could say it's sort of feeding the body and mind simply being in the concentration. So now your ability to sit for long periods of time uh, just increases dramatically. So finally, at that stage, you've achieved concentration. When that quality emerges, and the great yogis, the great sages say that if you had all the stuff in place to do the training, which is not easy, by the way. Just getting the conditions in place is not easy, but if you had all the conditions in place, you could accomplish that capability in about 6 months. And some teachers say that if you have the right techniques and you've been at this a while and you have all the conditions in place, it'll take about 3 months. But that's 3 months of you doing like 16 hours of practice a day, which for most of us is already doing that amount of practice is like unimaginable, right? So you need to have already done a lot of work, and you need to know what you're doing, and probably you need to have advice of advanced practitioners who are already accomplished in all this to be able to make progress at that speed. Okay, dear friends, comrades, fellows on the path. At 10 o'clock, I'm going live with Neil Ripsky, who's a Shaolin lineage holder for a very rare lineage of Shaolin practice called the 18 Lohan Palm, something like this. And that system includes a complete Shaolin system for training in martial stuff, of course, but then also that martial stuff transitions over to a whole series of exercises you could say that are a bit like Buddhist yoga, physical yoga, to make the body perfect for seated practice. And then there are energetic practices you could say are sort of like Qigong or Neigong kind of practices. So you have the energetic component that also supports training in concentration, training in meditation, and then you have the full-on meditation aspect. So he's a holder of a complete Shaolin lineage system that includes the martial aspect all the way to the sort of final meditative practices. So it's very rare to find somebody that holds that kind of lineage, especially outside of China. And um, and his particular teacher also has an interesting story in that the lineage that he learned went through went through Tibet before it came back to China, before it came to him. So his teacher actually learned it, even though it's a Chinese system, learned it through, I think, a Tibetan gentleman. Although he'll be able to, I may be scrambling it up, but this is what I remember from what he's told me. He'll tell the story tonight. And so it actually has some of the richness, you could say, of the Tibetan understanding of how all of this works baked into it. And then, of course, if you're doing anything, not anything, but almost anything in the Chinese traditions, they tend to be kind of syncretic. And so his teacher had also trained in the Taoist systems. So it's like this incredibly rich set of understandings for how all of these moving parts are supposed to work as one system. And he's packaged it into his teacher packaged it into this one training system. And Shaolin, of course, has been interacting with Taoists and Confucians and the great practitioners and intellectuals of China for a long time. And so it's already a very rich system, made even more rich by its contact with the Tibetans and its contact with Taoists. So very interesting. And I'm in particular excited because it has this physical component, which those of you who have done yoga, right? Like the physical yogas of the Hindu systems come out of complete systems of training where the physical yogas are part of what makes your body ready for meditation. By the way, there are basically the equivalent of Taoist yogas that make the body suitable for meditation, and there are equivalent of Buddhist yogas that come through the Buddhist tantras and come through places like Shaolin that make the body suitable for meditation. So there's like a complete physical aspect to this whole thing that most people don't even know exists, and he has it. And not only does he have it, because some people they say, "Oh yeah, I got this thing," and blah blah blah, because they did it for a year. He trained with his teacher for years, so he has the full richness of one of these traditions, and has practiced it diligently for a long time. So it's an incredible blessing that we have this opportunity. I'm really excited to hear more about the system and his background and everything, and to have that all recorded and available for you. So the first tonight at 10 o'clock will be the first episode of what I'm calling the Sit and See. The Sit and See, the Two Truths podcast, where I'm inviting practitioners of various kinds, some Buddhists, some non-Buddhists, to talk about training your mind as a modern person living in the modern world. So Neil is going to be my first guest at 10 o'clock tonight. So if you'd like to attend, it'll be sort of a casual coffee conversation between him and I, probably for the first 45 minutes or an hour. And then I'm going to open it up for questions for people that are in the audience. Then I'm going to take the recording and get rid of all the air gaps and publish it as the first episode of the podcast. But obviously only the people who are there will get to see the full unedited version. So if you'd like to see that, then I'll see you at 10 o'clock. All right. Okay. Thank you all for coming.